faire le lien entre la discussion de ce matin et la discussion de maintenant. C'est-à-dire la discussion sur les demandes des groupes marginaux, marginalisés et la terrorisation sociale. Le communisme, c'est une demande de groupes marginalisés. Le prolétariat. Il y a une demande de groupes marginalisés socialement, historiquement, qui a été théorisée par et nous avons l'implosion de mouvements institutionnalisés de la victoire de ce mouvement marginalisé, qui était marginalisé. Ce qui veut dire, à mon avis, la conceptualisation, la théorisation sociale de ce mouvement marginalisé n'a pas établi la bonne distance théorique avec son objet. Il a sacralisé le prolétariat, comme les nationalistes sacralisent la nation, comme les féministes sacralisent la personne de sexe féminin. C'est-à-dire, chaque fois on sacralise l'objet, il se pose un problème lorsque l'objet sacralisé peut avoir la conquête du pouvoir. Il n'y a pas de catégorie sociale, femmes, nation, groupe religieux, ethnie, qui soit une catégorie sociale extra-humaine, qui se comporte comme d'une manière sainte avec le pouvoir. Il n'y a pas, c'est ça. La deuxième remarque avec ça, c'est-à-dire, je voulais dire, on a tendance, en tant que sociologue, de sacraliser notre objet lorsque notre objet appartient à une catégorie dominée et d'établir un processus d'identification avec cette catégorie dominée qui pourrait, une fois ayant le pouvoir, se comporter pire que la catégorie dominante traditionnelle qui l'a précédée. Et ça s'applique au mouvement nationaliste, ça s'applique au mouvement communiste, ça s'applique, je ne sais pas si les mouvements féministes vont prendre le pouvoir, mais c'est un problème qui se pose. Et je crois que ce qu'il vient de dire pour les sociétés disons, capitalistes démocrates, c'est qu'ils ont arrivé à créer un équilibre entre la demande libérale, la demande égalitaire et la demande identitaire, collective. Et les demandes des dominés, ce sont des demandes sectorielles qui ne proposent pas des solutions d'équilibre entre des valeurs contradictoires. Et c'est là leur danger. Tout mouvement qui sacralise un type unique de demande, que ce soit une demande libérale unique, que ce soit une demande égalitaire unique, que ce soit une demande identitaire unique, tout porte en elle la guerre civile. C'est l'un des objets qui fait le débat sur le mouvement féministe dans nos pays. C'est comment concilier, comment articuler la demande féministe, la demande égalitaire économique et la demande identitaire de l'État-nation ou du groupe régional. Parce que la littérature dominante de la demande féministe est une littérature de type libéral, individuel, exclusivement. Dominée chez nous, hein, C'est ça le débat.
Did you? Yeah. I'd like to respond to a couple of issues which have been raised here. First of all, I think we have to be we have to make a distinction between the discussion about what was wrong with communism, or for that matter, what was wrong with colonialism, that needs to be discussed, and what kind of analytical and theoretical lessons we can draw, and what can explain what happened. Obviously, there was a failure of freedom. I mean, there was lack of freedom. There was the political dictatorship. I mean, had become, I mean, an important feature of actually existing communism, and a difficult, and this dictatorship, the existence of this dictatorship was certainly part of the end game, I mean, of the end crisis of communism, of the implosion of it, because of the erosion of the belief in the dictatorship itself, its delegitimation from above. But that's, I mean, it's not, I mean, the communism didn't collapse because of a failure of freedom. I mean, I think, unfortunately, I mean, if it had been done, I mean, that would have been just and deserved, but it just was not quite exactly what happened. But it's true, of course, that it's noteworthy that it was the first peace generation, the first generation of of communist leaders in Eastern Europe who had been born and had, or at least had grown up in a period of peace, who started to doubt the legitimacy of the dictatorship. That was the Gorbachev generation. I mean, he was the first, and many of the Eastern European small country communist leaders, I mean, till the very end, I mean, were formed by the period of the world wars and of fascism. I mean, Honecker was a crucial example, also Ceausescu and for many others. The point about the secularization of the proletariat. I mean, in general terms, I agree with you. I mean, one shouldn't. I mean, as a secularized atheist, I mean, I certainly am opposed to all kinds of secularization. But I don't think that was. I mean, it wasn't a problem, I would say. On the contrary, I would say that that was one of the redeeming features of communism. That till the very end, I mean, it took, most of it was lip service and demagogy and so on, but not all of it. I mean, it took till the very end, I mean, it took the idea seriously that the regime was supposed to represent the working class, and there were certain special institutions geared to that, and the communist parties, all of them, took special care to see to it that they had a working class membership and a representation at industrial workplaces and a number of other things. I think that this was a positive aspect of it. I mean, this is an evaluation, of course. I mean, but it's a positive evaluation of the egalitarianism inherent in this. But I also think that it was positive for the regime. I mean, it sort of sustained, it contributed to the stability of the regime. But it's, on the other hand, the issue which Pata raised about nationalism, which I referred to in my introduction, though very briefly, I think is crucial, because it was fatal. I mean, that to the Eastern European communist regimes, that they were all in one way or the other in conflict with nationalism. That's a crucial difference between the European communists and the Asian ones, and it's probably, I mean, a major contributing reason why communist regimes or communist parties are still maintaining themselves in spite of the media and in spite of capitalism, in spite of lots of things and so on. I mean, there's still a ruling communist party in China and in Vietnam. And at least one major reason for that is that the communist parties are very much identified with the nation, with a national revival. That was, of course, not the case of most of the small communist countries in Eastern Europe in which communism was imposed with the help of the Soviet Red Army. But it was also in the end game of the Soviet Union, the nationalist card was used to break up the Soviet Union. I mean, and it was. I think it has to be stressed that it was, in many cases, it was a card that was played rather than nationalism breaking up the Soviet Union. I mean, but it was played very skillfully, and it did appeal to certain sectors of the population. It was even possible, I mean, and this was done very deliberately and very skillfully, and it caught on, I mean, for a while in the disintegration process of the Soviet Union, of putting the Soviet Union as a threat to, a shackle of, or an oppressive of the Russian nation. Not only, I mean, the Ukrainian, or the Estonian, or the Armenian, or Georgian, or Kazakh, or what have you, but also the Russian nation. This was also, of course, I mean, part of the end game of Yugoslavia, where the Serb nations were represented as being oppressed by Yugoslavia. So I think, yes, this is, I mean, the force of nationalism, I think, is one of the most important lessons of the well, both of the failure of colonialism, of course, that's very obvious, but also the collapse of communism has very much to do with nationalism.
Merci. Moi, je voudrais peut-être ajouter une remarque qui me semble discuter ce que vient de dire notre collègue, mais je dirais que le communisme, lorsqu'il existait en tant que système, donnait à nos intellectuels, à nos sociologues, un certain confort dans leur discours sociologique. Et nous avons connu durant les années 60, un peu avant, et surtout les années 60 et 70, dans tout le monde arabe, une prédominance des deux courants, développementalistes et théorie de la dépendance, Anwar Abdel-Malik, Samir Amin, etc. Et tous ces et l'existence de l'Union soviétique, du communisme en tant que structure de référence donnait un confort énorme au discours sociologique. Je prends uniquement le discours sociologique, pas le discours intellectuel en général, et donnait un confort et aussi une certaine légitimation externe, non pas interne, et des rapports quand même viables avec l'État. Un rapport viable, qu'il soit conflictuel ou lorsque l'État n'est pas développementaliste ou qu'il soit un rapport, disons, organique, lorsque c'est le cas de l'Algérie, le cas de la Tunisie des années 60, l'Égypte de Nasser, etc. Sans utiliser le terme implosion, parce que implosion sociale, mais je dirais la disparition de la référence soviétique, pas la disparition du communisme. Quand même, il y a la référence chinoise qui reste en changeant, a donné un inconfort. Et c'est là où je rejoins notre collègue tous ces intellectuels-là ont flirté tout d'abord avec la religion. Et ce flirt avec la religion conforte bien la latence, la latent religion, dans ces sociétés comme le premier confort dans la culture sociale qui peut consolider l'identité. Abdelkader était ignorant en choses de l'islam et en choses de la culture arabo-musulmane. Au bout d'un certain moment, il a flirté et il finira par devenir imam.
It's more than a flirt.
Some of us are already.
Alors, cette demande identitaire est apparue comme réaction à cet inconfort. Bon, elle a donné des évolutions sociales, politiques, etc. Mais contentons-nous de l'espace du discours sociologique. Je dirais qu'actuellement, il y a un autre problème, un nouvel inconfort. Parce que malgré le fait que la référence qui est actuellement acceptée par l'intellectuel, par l'État et par les acteurs de la société en général, c'est la référence libérale, avec son apport égalitaire et un apport libéral économique, etc., mais sans avoir des réponses à la question de l'identité. S'ajoute à cela cette deuxième situation, c'est qu'actuellement la référence à la nation avec la globalisation commence à se déstructurer. Et je dirais, en utilisant les termes de Janet ce matin, c'est que nous avons un problème avec les old software of sociology, mais on a aussi actuellement un grand problème avec the old hardware of sociology, la société, ses limites, ses frontières. Et c'est là peut-être que se pose l'un des grands défis pour le discours sociologique.
Arnaud.
In fact, Goran, you say that communism didn't collapse by lack of the question of freedom, lack of freedom. I'm not sure of that. In fact, I know that civil society, people in Russia were perhaps not so engaged in a very strong struggle for but perhaps at the end there were certainly. But I think what is probably very important, it was in some way structural, because in our time of networks, large elements of people around the globe, trust in citizens at least, and moreover probably on the accent on innovation, the power of innovation, which is very, very important, which changed completely the competition in the industry, for example. It was impossible to pursue a very planned, centralized economy, and so it was necessary to open on at least the economic freedom, like the Chinese have in some ways done, and which have probably maintained, as you say, the system differently. So that was certainly impossible. And also, I think the pressure was coming very much for the individualization and also the weight of individual, agency in some ways, I would say. Because we in sociology in the 70s were really thinking that, or part of us at least, were thinking that the structural determination were very, very strong. Were so strong that, the individual was just only le support des structures sociales. So now we have understood, I think, that the structural determination have to be weighted very strongly by individual action or small group action, meso actions, which are, of course, linked to a strong civil society where people can associate, can bring ideas, can bring opinions, and makes the society move. So I think that there was probably a deadlock for the communist society as we have known it in the Soviet Union, because particularly of all these reasons which were destabilizing completely the system.
Yes, I'd like to say a few words on the issue of modernity, in light of the remarks made by Johan. And then I'd like to say a few words, secondly, on the impact of 1989 on East Asian countries. I think the tragedy of these communist regimes, as well as post-colonial peripheral states, countries, is that this is, in a sense, a tragedy of catch-up. They all aspire to overnight catch up the so-called advanced Western societies. And of course, that prescription and dosage, of course, have been given by the Westerners, and primarily Americans. Nevertheless, the communists took this, borrowing your term, shortcut path, and most of the post-colonialist colonial states, primarily nationalist state, took sort of high-speed industrialization path. This is particularly the case with the so-called East Asian miracles. And also, today we refer to these states, these cases, as the developmental dictatorships. So all these are, in a sense, not natural. This is not a good phrasing, but it's all artificial. It's a human effort, but it's all sort of distorted effort, and it's all artificial. It's a shortcut, high speed. So it's quite obvious to generate a whole range of negative consequences.
This is about East Asian countries?
No. The communist, as well as all peripheral areas, Africa, Latin America, including Asia, and including East Asian miracles. And today, now you see the negative consequences of even East Asian miracles. One of the lessons that we can learn, also to think about in terms of future sociology, is that, okay, now everything has happened, and we sort of sit back and relax and look back and reflect upon what we have tried and what we have done and what kind of mistake we had made, and all these sort of artificial experiments are not going to work. Becoming modern, I think, is still a viable, goal. Can I say that? I'm not a modernization, modernization-ist, but nonetheless, I guess that's still the aspiration for majority of the population on the globe. And if that's the case, then I think we need some kind of reflexive sociology, becoming, say, for example, an East Asian sociologist, by far we more or less discarded all the Asian elements, traditional thoughts, ideas, cultural elements, practices, and so on, as pre-modern or all kinds of names. Now all of a sudden, there's huge literature praising all those previously, Bavarian or pre-modern backward values and ideas. And I think now we have to sort of sit back and relax and reflect upon, and trying to draw from each region, from each culture, each civilization, the heritages, the practices and cultural elements to sort of reconstruct our discipline. That's one thing. And the impact of 1989, this collapse of the Soviet Union and East Central Europe, had a tremendous impact on East Asian sociologists, primarily. Political scientists, they don't care. Economists, they don't pay any attention to that. That's a good thing, But sociologists, tend to be sort of progressive. At least a good majority of sociologists in, I cannot even generalize this to East Asia, but in the case of South Korea, okay, we had this tremendous success, and but still, we always thought this to be an alternative path to take. So, nobody could speak in public straightforwardly, but nonetheless, amongst the circle, this path that Soviet Union and the Communist bloc have taken as regarded to be still a very viable, strong alternative, a very attractive path. And this collapse was a major blow to this, in a sense, aspiration or belief, or perhaps misperception or illusion, So they maybe have awakened, and it may be good. But that, in a sense, blow and bomb eradicated all kinds of sort of opposition voices or opinions to what the sort of the mainstream developmentalists are trying to achieve. So now today you see, this whole globalization and all the discourse on neoliberal projects and ideological assaults on markets and so on. Therefore, without any resistance, firms can do all this rationalization, and states are on the side of the firms, and capitals go to overseas. So this ideologically and on the community of scholars had a tremendous impact.
All right. I think just to put it crudely is that still to this day we are grappling with the explosion that happened globally, but it originated, I suppose, through the French Revolution, the idea that people are equal. In that sense, the argument about equality. And then you get social science coming up and say, no, social order. All these people are chaotic. And you have the radical social science saying, no, it's study the institutions that limit that freedom. And that is, in a sense, the vicious dialectic that has been with us and being redefined all the time. The Soviet model was one such model. Mind you, by the way, corrective, the Soviet model encouraged national independence movements, as we were saying. In Africa, for example, it was the only supporter for genuine national movements for a long time. But anyway, that was another take. on that issue, that okay, there are nations, people are equal, but there are nations. Then there were other takes, and still to this day, we are traumatized about what that equality means, whether it involves difference or whatever. And I think that the collapse of existing communisms, I think it's got three consequences. Firstly, I think we have to look at the state and the limits of the state as that nodal point through which you harness social and material resources to transform things. I think that's in question at the moment, whether that's happening. Second thing is that what is being ravished, and I don't know whether it can be ravished for much longer, but collective efforts in changing one's condition are being ravished in the same breath. I think we'll witness other kinds of collective projects coming through. The final little consequence, that the post-colonial period did not give people of Africa or others voice because it goes hand in hand with the actual both intellectual and material dependency of those places. Material and intellectual dependency of those places. Unless those conditions get transformed, again, the voice will be all the time quite muffled. That's it. Maria.
Yes, I would like to continue a little bit the argument that Arnaud has just raised. And while I was listening to Göran's intervention, I was thinking what I call transitology. That is to say, this mainstream sociology that raised 20 years ago to explain the political and social changes, first in Southern Europe and then in Latin America. Works a la Huntington, for example, in his horrible book, The Third Wave, or O'Donnell, Schmitter, Tchaikovsky, etc. And I think that we have to be very careful not to repeat the same errors that transitology did in explaining these political and social changes. 20 years after the first changes in Portugal, Spain, etc., it seems to me that it is clear that this transitology that understands political transitions, I don't like the word transitions, but anyway, as mere games of checks between political and economical elites, do not explain really the depth and the outcomes of changes. In that sense, I agree with Stonka. I think it's a pity he's not there, and as Gilles just said, that we have to take into account the values, the memories, the cultures, elements in explaining the origins, the nature, and the outcomes of these processes. But above all, I am a little bit concerned by the implicit exclusion or underestimation in your scheme of the role of movements and masses in political and social change. I think that we have to, if we are all our discussions since yesterday, we are pleading for new paradigms of interpretation in sociology. I am convinced that we have to look for new ways, for new forms of appearance of resistance and opposition, not the traditional ones. I'm convinced that if we look in different ways for different ways of conflict or hidden transcripts, as James Scott puts it, the picture will be different in looking to communist changes.
Thank you, Heinz. On transitology,
Yeah.
It remembers me that in the 70s, particularly after the military coup against Salvador Allende in Chile and the military coup in Uruguay, the same people who later on spoke on the democratic transition spoke on the transition to a new kind of political regime, which was called bureaucratic authoritarianism, in which should be, this was the argumentation of Adorno, which should be one characteristic inherent to the future development of underdeveloped capitalism. 10 years later, they had to do another transitology to explain why what they had said not had happened, but it was happening exactly the contrary thing. But I didn't want to enter this point just anecdotal. I think I want to go to 2 points very briefly. Goran said at the beginning, if I understood him well, the beginning of his contribution, he said one thing which is very, very important. He said that the fall of communism and the fall of the implosion of communism and the implosion of colonialism has opened the door for different modernities. You did say that, and I agree with you. Till the end till the implosion of these two phenomena, we had two models of modernity, which, as a matter of fact, had the same basis, had the same, let's say, techno-economic rationality, even with a difference between planned economies and market economies. It was the same, let's say, accumulation rationality behind in each of the two modernity models, in each of the two modernities. Nowadays, it's very important to rescue this idea that the implosion of colonialism and communism gives the possibility for sociology to think in terms of modernities, of different modernities. Different modernities which can have some characteristic in common, but which have certainly other characteristics which are not coinciding. And the last point is with Maria Luz. I have the same impression. I think we are talking on sociology without actors. We are talking on sociology without social action, without social practice, without subject, without collective subjects. And I wonder if we shouldn't do an effort, a common effort, to bring this point, this item once more into the discussion on what is going on in our societies and in society in general. We have to return to the actors. We have to find the new actors. We have to see what kind of action these actors develop. If you excuse my pleonasm in this case. And I think this is a very important point. And as far as I could read the different contributions which introduced the 10 or 11 books, it's a point which is in every one of this essay. In every one of these essays, with more or less emphasis, but it is there, and I think we should rescue it, and we should maintain it in our discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you one question of sort of somewhat related, although somewhat different. you said near the end that the nationalist card was played skillfully. What I wanted to know is by whom, because that is one way that I wanted to get into this notion of actors. So that's what I have sort of three quite different points. The second point is with the very topic of what we're talking about, the collapse of the colonialisms. I don't know, but I don't see them having collapsed. I mean, I'm finding it puzzling. I mean, we're sort of accepting the rhetoric of post-colonialism. I see them in new forms, but I don't see them collapsed. And I'd be really interested in hearing...
But do you see communism collapse?
Well, I see the Soviet Union as a different regime, so
the British Empire is also a new regime.
Yeah.
Do I go next?
Yes, you do.
So I'm just trying to get my head around what we mean by colonial, by sort of the end of, the collapse of the colonialisms, or rather, I would be interested in trying to understand what the new forms of colonialism are. Which I sort of, which I heard a bit from in Asia, and I think it's really important to try to understand what those are. And I guess in just the third point has already really been said in terms of looking at social movements and understanding various forms of social struggle.
Okay. Janet?
I'm feeling very alienated in this discussion because I disagreed with the two most basic premises that we started out with, and then I am worried where the discussion goes. First, implosion. The world was more organized in large groupings in the 19th century and early 20th century than it is today in this age of globalization.
Was more organized.
It was organized into large empires and subordinates within those empires. So that I have not bought the line that the world is more globalized now than it used to be. It's just differently globalized. What you're calling post-colonial is didn't implode. It did explode. There were liberation movements. And I think within the Soviet Union there were also class and nationalist units that were undermining. The result of the two was kind of sort of fragmentation into nations. So I see parallels, and I see the reconstitution of control under different ways and with different agencies. So that's my first discomfort. The second is you make me uncomfortable, and I suddenly realize why. Because you have bought, not you.
You are looking in this direction.
You have bought that dreadful narrative of the West. That in the beginning there was oppression, and then capitalism came along and economic development, and along with that went freedom and liberty and individualism, as if there was no struggle. I assure you that the early stages of industrialization in the West were even worse than they have been in the countries that catch up. The oppression of workers was worse. The control of capital over workers. This is what it's all about. So that development and liberalism and individualism and freedom didn't go together in the West, but when we retell that story, they have forgotten much of the struggle. Many of the things that are going on in Korea, the labor movements, for example, are very familiar. There was big business, and there were factories before worker organizations, so that there was a conflictual history, which in the writing up of the story of modernization was cleaned up. There was just these really smart people who invented all these nice technologies, and because they were intelligent, this was a big struggle. There is a big struggle now, I think, and this comes back to your point of there are movements that need to take place. We're not post-colonial. We're just colonial in a kind of somewhat different fashion. I'm sure that Russia will try by whatever mechanisms to build alliances with what you call imploded, but I say exploded. It'd be nice to get back the oil of Kazakhstan. So these discontinuities, there's been something that bothered me, and I found I responded to part statements of almost everybody. I agreed with part of what somebody said, and then I said, no. So now you can all disagree with me.
Marcel. Ok, j'aimerais vous donner un petit break et se demander si les classiques peuvent nous aider à comprendre ce qui s'est passé en Russie. Et j'ai trouvé facilement Marcel Mauss, dont je viens d'éditer les textes politiques. Et Marcel Mauss a publié en 1924 un texte qui s'intitule Appréciation sociologique du bolchevisme. Évaluation sociologique, sociological evaluation of Bolshevism. He is trying to analyze this event. For him, the Bolsheviks were bad, naive sociologists. Why? There are many reasons, and these reasons are the 4 or 5. The first one is you can't destroy the civil society. The state is not everything. We have to take account to give a place to the associative life. Social movements, cooperatives, unions, etc. That's the first lesson. The second one is we can destroy the market. For him, it's a kind of natural thing. You will see that the nature of the man is to exchange things and everything. So, according to him, the nature of economy is a mixed one. Yes, it's capitalism, planned state, and so on. Cooperative, you can build a pure economy, which is capitalist or communist. The third one is about the problem of violence and rapid or quick change. The cost for using violence is always high. You can change a society by decree. You need a majority, and you need also a legitimacy. And one of his conclusions is about the question of democracy. So I think one of the lessons about the nature of democracy. It's not only a political thing. It's an economic thing. It's also a social thing. You need a society life. And also it's a cultural thing. There's no democracy, according to most, without a civil culture, a civic culture, or without, if I can use the word, without a moral. So we need to speak about the question of moral.
Thank you, Robert.
I think that we are in this. We are in the middle of the process that is not yet completed, and we are witnessing incomplete process. The collapse of the colonialists is true, but the process of decolonization is not already completed, is not achieved. So the master disappeared, but the servant is still thinking in the master, thinking in the same process of decolonization. And this is incomplete process created different behaviors and social actors. And some consequence of the process of the fight against colonialism were still seen. This, for instance, I am thinking in Algeria and all the process that is happening now. If we revised all the documents of the 60s, or the more classics, Les Damnés de la Terre, the first chapter on violence, and the introduction by Jean-Paul Sartre, it's the same process that we are still living of violence in different ways. But so it's a process that. The second is regarding the collapse of the communism. That is true and is a collapse that has a special impact in the Soviet Union and in Russia and all that. But the process in political struggles is incomplete because the communist is over, but the imperialist is alive. And it's still there, and it's still in the function with different...
Sorry, what is
Imperialism is alive.
Imperialism.
Silver's communism in a number of countries of the world.
And
there's Vietnam, there's China, and Hong Kong. It hasn't all collapsed. That's modifying, sure.
yeah, it's modifying. It's something different that I agree with current that is more linked with personalism. And this imparts the situation in Cuba because it's very complicated. It's changing economic the organization, and it's a combination of desire of changing, but at the same time, the way of the communists and the party and Castro is the only way to put a barrier against United States and all that. So but for other countries in Latin America and in Africa, the situation is that imperialism is there and colonialism disappeared. But all the feelings, all the identities, and from the individual point of view, I see that it depends on some rural and urban, or some kind of different cultural influences, are a tendency to more individualist behavior that is very clear and marked, and on the other hand, some more this fanatic behavior. As completely, the directions completely opposed. But my impression is that the origin of the reaction is the same, but the reaction is different.
We're not entirely keeping our sense of the analysis of sort of the political economy of the world system and the analysis of social theorizing completely separate. We gave ourselves a topic, the lessons of recent history for social theorizing. Actually, the inspiration for that, in a sense, the introduction of Piotr Stomka, who unfortunately isn't here, and who argues basically there that we have to learn about social theorizing from this political event, and he discusses it in terms of the importance of social trust, etc., etc., etc. So it's a political event that has occurred. Certain regimes did, in fact, collapse. And another political event did occur. It was the end of formal colonialisms. And I think the question is whether these political events, not the analysis of these political events themselves, why they occurred or how much they've changed in the world, but whether, in fact, the mere fact, it is the case that both sets of events were not predictive in terms of their rapidity. That is, if you look at the literature in the late 1940s,
nobody was saying, neither among the movements or within the imperial powers, that within 10 or 15 years all these countries would be independent. So it was in that sense a, quote, surprise, unquote. And if you look at all the literature on East Central Europe, written in the 1980s, no matter what their political opinions were, whether they were pro-communist, anti-communist, in between, nobody was predicting that with it like that, bingo, these regimes would somehow, as political structures, collapse. So I'm not sure that implosion is the wrong word. There was a very sudden process, and when all is said and done, it was a relatively bloodless process. So we have something occurred. Now, is that terribly important? We can debate that. And should we think about the world in different ways because of the suddenness of this phenomenon? I'm not sure we should. In fact, I don't think we should, actually. I don't think it's changed my way of looking at the world. But the question is at least open, and it seems to me we should continue to discuss it. Joran, you asked for the floor, so...
yeah, I'd like to respond to some of the criticisms raised to me. There was one thing in what you said, Sue, which I disagreed with, and that's, you talked about artificial experiments, or the artificiality of this catch-up process. I think that's a dangerous notion. Both the idea of something being artificial or something being fake, which is one of Piotr Stomka's favorite words. There are fake modernities, there are artificial, well, you didn't explicitly put together artificial modernities, but both the artificiality or the fake, both presuppose that there is one, or there is something which is authentically modern, which is the yardstick against which everything should be measured. And I think that's a very dangerous idea. That was the classical sort of Eurocentric or Western-centric conception of modernity and modern society. Things which exist, and which I found difficult to call, institutions, artificial, if they're really existent, or to call flawed, or perhaps failed, or perhaps evil modern projects, fake, also seem to me of meaningless, or at best, and dangerous at worst. Now, with regard to the role of social movement, the role of values and culture, well, obviously, we can have lots of discussion about this and so on, but and Iman summed up, some of my position already with regard to implosion. I think I would like to stress, that colonialism did not explode. Take the case of the British Empire, the crucial, most important of all the empires. Well, obviously, of course, there was opposition. There were anti-imperialist movements, and there were also colonial wars. But the fact is, of course, that the British won all these wars and so on. They crushed the Quit India campaign. They won the war in Malacca, they won the war in Kenya, but that didn't rescue colonialism for the British Empire anyway. I think that sort of illustrates,
the collapse of its wealth in the context of the Second World War certainly did.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's yes. The whole geopolitical situation of Britain and the sure. But so that's why I don't think it's very adequate to say that it exploded. There were colonial wars, and a few colonial wars were successful. The Algerian War, and the Vietnam War.
As sociologists, we see this though as some kind of interaction. That if Britain had been stronger, the battles against it might have had to be stronger. They might not have won on what I want to call that implosion, that the balance of independence needs and ability to repress and hold on.
I guess the reason why I'm stressed is that I think that I mean this is a process of systemic social change which we haven't paid much attention to previously, and the same thing goes with the collapse of communism. Obviously, I mean there were people who were active and against the regimes, and we also know, we have very good data on that it was a soaring of discontent among the population all over Eastern Europe, including the Soviet Union, in the late 1980s. And this was sort of growing from month to month in the years from 87, 88, 89. But on the other hand, I mean, the point is, or my point is, that all the repressive institutions were intact, and they obeyed orders, and there was never, I mean, any confrontation between the regimes and the population. In the end, again, actually, it was the East German Politburo itself which opened the wall of Berlin. And the key event, of course, in Eastern Europe, in my reading of it, I mean, is not 1989, but 1991. I mean, the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's the key thing. And there, well, Linda asked me, so I mean, who played the nationalist card? Well, in Russia, the nationalist card was played by the intelligentsia who were pinning their hopes on Yeltsin. They were, of course, not nationalists themselves, but they quite rightly assumed that it would be difficult to mobilize the masses in favor of long-live economic freedom or free market or what have you, and that nationalism was a much better bet, and they were quite right. So, I mean, this, but there wasn't. Why I talked about this as a card was that in Russia itself and there wasn't much of any genuine sort of anti-Soviet nationalism. So that was, I mean, the case in the Baltic republics and some of the other sort of outlying areas of the Soviet Union. But that's what I meant by using the nationalist card. Also, I mean, now, what other questions? Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's what I wanted to.
Partha, I give you the floor.
Well, I think with the introduction of Tomka, it makes the discussion can take a certain shape. Having read Tomka carefully, I can perceive that he himself is a product of apprehension in the Polish situation. And I tend to agree with Joran that he has before him a model of modernization which is westernization. And that is why there is an authentic modernization as against fake modernization. It's not alternative modernization, one having failed, the other probably still surviving, but if one is fake, the other is authentic. I mean, that's the implicit kind of indication that you find here. And then from it flows a number of propositions, I think, where actor and the agent and the structure system figures. But it is again a swing from system to agency. The culture, the values which go with modernity, freedom, progress, so on and so forth, world ethic. But freedom for whom, freedom for what? These are questions that are unanswered. And it seems to me that, again, I think the whole debate of modernization that is taking place since yesterday, and I have been following this, and Tomka falls very much central to this. At least in India, I think we have discussed it until the 70s. Beyond that, we haven't discussed modernization. It's not an important discourse at all. after, say, mid-70s, perhaps. The idea of modernization getting equated with westernization, and that it is a mismatch between the conditions, objective conditions that exist in India and the kind of model that is proposed, is very clearly explicated. But somehow we are going round and round on sociology being practically, examining modernity. I mean, as if sociology and modernity are, in some sense, linked up as the universe of substantive area of interest. And this is what bothers me. In fact, it bothers me that Emmanuel introduces sociology as something having to do with modernity. Of course, it is engaging with modernity. Modernity is a substantive area of debate and discussion, and it affects people's lives and has affected people's lives. But I would have thought that we have reached the stage where we are talking about social realities, its contradictions, the changes and conflicts that associate with contradictions and with reference to social realities. The fact that social reality is so complex that it is very difficult to comprehend it in its totality, but we can approach it. That parallel paradigms are perhaps efforts at reaching this understanding of social reality. And it is when I heard Emmanuel in Seoul, I thought this was a really path-breaking, proposition, that you have to look at these 300, 400 years of so-called modernization efforts within the context of 10,000 years of human history, where it's maybe a small cyclical event. There could be different historiographers explaining, what this modernization is all about. There could have been alternative ones elsewhere. And there were new ideas that were generated, I think, in Seoul and consequently even in Bombay, where the whole idea of science and social science from beginning till its future were projected. But somehow, I don't know, we have got fixated here with modernity. And modernity with what content? In 1977, Emmanuel says it is a contentless concept, which has a direction which is fictional. Suddenly, how is it becoming so central?
Well, it's only been so central in the history of sociology as a discipline. All I said yesterday was that sociology, when it began in the 19th century as a knowledge movement, was centrally concerned with modernity. A lot of sociologists are still centrally concerned, but I don't suggest that is, in fact, the subject matter. But I think we're going to have to continue this after our break. So I thank you.
Le thème de la dernière session, un thème qui s'impose à la fin de ce colloque, c'est le thème concernant le rôle de la sociologie dans la société en cette fin de siècle.
There is, as you might have noted, a proliferation of research articles, books on the global and the local. This in some ways, of course, is a reprise of the old debate, which modernization theory, which was so central to modernization theory, the traditional, modern, etc. So the question, I think, is to analyze how it came back, and if it is different, how. I think we might start by saying that there wasn't really any consensus, even though some, I suppose, lesser modernization theorists wanted us to believe that. There wasn't much consensus that there would be a single, unilinear, authentic, true modernity. Not even in the old programmers, perhaps with the exception of Marx, but even with Marx, as you probably know, towards the end of his life, he was getting less convinced of unilinearity, and there's that famous exchange with Vera Zasulic, where he sweats over several drafts of a letter and then finally decides to be relatively non-committal about unilinearity. So, in fact, this notion of a single blueprint has never been sort of part of the canon. So the idea is that, in fact, different trajectories were possible, and that there was no necessary convergence, and therefore there would be implicitly a great deal of room to be given to recognize in terms of local cultures and practices and local versions of social relations, etc. So, in that sense, the modernity tradition sort of discussion recognizes the importance of the indigenous, the importance of the local, and social processes are supposed to be, of course, filtered through this context of processes of modernization impacting on something local, something indigenous. Here, however, there is somewhat of a confusion which should be analytically cleared, and I think the correct way of clearing it would be perhaps through some kind of a separation of the social and the political. For the purposes of this analytic distinction, I think what we might talk about is, on the one hand, the processes of modernization, which are more or less anonymous and which act through flows that are not necessarily controllable by through social movements or through political projects, and they act upon local culture, local practices, etc. But then there is also a second element, and of course this is an element that has come up in the discussion several times. This had to do with projects of modernity or modernisms, which were often carried out by political groups whose principal aim was to come to power in some way or to exercise power in some way and carry out these projects which they thought to be the relevant or the desirable or the appropriate type of modernity to be imposed on the particular society. So the first type of sort of more autonomous processes of modernization in conjunction with what existed locally these came out as negotiations between the local, the indigenous, the social practice that existed, the cultural practice that existed,